Alright, I'm going to see if I can do this. I want to get back to the east. I want to get back to the east. I mean, I'm from the west, and I'm talking about the south, the east, and the north. But I'm the west that wants to get to those other 3 points of the compass to bring me back to me. I want to get back to me. I don't think this is going to work right now, but I'm going to try it anyway because serendipity dictates. I never studied that. I just kept messing around with my voice for years in my car. And I think that is a good message. I think that is a good lesson. Like, really. I just made ugly noises for an hour, half hour, an hour a day. Sometimes the whole way to work. Sometimes just for 5 minutes, but pretty much every day. For like, give or take 10 years. And without studying from anybody, just being inspired from having heard it, and though I can't do, well, at different times I can do different things, but serendipity dictated now to do a high-pitched one. Some people can do all the way low, and sometimes, very rarely, I can do all the way low with a high. But that seems to be associated with E, because there's different ways to make vowels, and they correspond to different components. It seems as though for me, at least now in my personal evolution of this song, I'm focused on these high pitches, which might not be a bad thing, because it's that whole idea of rising and like negative, well, because I talked about negative numbers before, that relates also to reverse time, which I think is also wrong in a way, because we are living forms going backwards through time. And what we associate with superluminal speeds going backwards in time is actually the true forward. Shit. Here you tell me. Who is more important? The story, the real, the true story of the Underground Railroad to the people, and understanding it, overstanding it, is so much more important than my personal health. And it's a story that gives me power and healing. If you could have seen me before I pressed that little record button earlier today, I was like, bah, bah. Bad shape. A black sheep. Bah. But we're here to put the black sheep on white horses. And we're here to put the white sheep on black horses. depends on your speakers, how you hear that. And it will be different than how I heard that. Back to the yin yang and the way, well, this is a yin yang because it's a circle with what I call the Chinese pie. Don't think of it as racist. Think of it as that golden spike that meets the little people of Asia. And I know the little people, the black little people we call pygmies, and the white little people we call leprechauns. I don't know what the Asian little people are called. But they exist. Oh, they exist. They are beautiful people. But you wouldn't know that thinking in the mindset that we have now if you were to look at them necessarily. But you might too. Because those little people of Asia, they're beautiful. Well, I don't have a name for it. I'll find it. Just radiates. People of the air, the last airbenders. So I could say I'm self-taught, but in a way I'm not, because I was inspired. Inspiration alone negates the idea of self-taught. No one taught me how to do that. And I'm not saying like I'm super great at it or anything, but had, when I started, heard me now doing that, I would have been like, I can do that? And because I remember that standpoint of wanting to understand that so much. And now, I still don't understand it, but I can do it. Go figure. Maybe someday I'll actually, like, totally understand it. It's just like the pitcher who can throw the curveball, or who can throw the, the knuckleball. The knuckle sandwich. The ball that goes, but there's an exact physics behind it. And some, do you want to be the physicist who can, well, the this and the that, and the C and the D, and the differential of the integral of the this and the that, the category set? Or do you want to be the guy who can throw the ball? Or, all physics that we can learn in school is incomplete because there's no unified theory. So it's all wrong, but it's all a massive achievement in so much as it's right. It's less worse. It's a better lie. Pretty fucking damn good. But anything that you can do with the physics that we can know now that we learn in school, not to say that there isn't a complete physics, there is. The Riemann hypothesis, all that shit. Totally already figured out. Prime numbers, a formula, an exact formula that gives the nth prime number already exists. That's one of the things that the intelligence agencies of intelligence agencies of intelligence agencies in the bunkers all the way down, below 51, 50, 49, 48, 47, 52, 53, 54, 55, and 6. Long ago it was figured out. Privacy encryption. Yeah. There is no encryption. There is no encryption. everything you do is known by a larger group of people than you think, and they are much more compassionate than you think. Where was I going? Where was I going? Okay, that trailed off. Back to the yin yang. Square root of I. They say that plus or minus, I've gone over this, but I haven't really got to it. I haven't got to the yin yang. And this wasn't a study of the yin yang, but I found the yin yang there and the proportions of the yin yang there. And what I like about this image too, even though it's not perfect, it's a better lie. And there is some small minor key points of perfection here. There are meats here, but not all the meats that need to be. And there are several false meats that ought not be. But it's a better lie. You see all these lines? Because of my last video, I realized you don't see the lines. So I will bring you closer. We will zoom in. We zoom in, we zoom out. We zoom in, we zoom out. So in some sense, this is the way where east meets west. I was looking into the square root of -1. Or I'm sorry. I was looking into the square root of I. But I also know that multiplication, like, here's I. If you multiply I times I, you get here. And multiply times I again, you get here. And multiply it times I again, and you get here. So it's all just keep multiplying by I, and you keep going boing, 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 boing. So then that comes into the question of roots of complex 1. But, and this is the big thing. I'm going to go right ahead and lay down. Fuck it. Got coins falling out of my pocket. Alright. The whole idea of like the Copernican revolution and the Galilean revolution as we understand it. And, well, I have heard some description. What was it? One of them was killed, maybe, and one of them wasn't. Because one of them persisted in telling the truth and one of them lied. But anyway, between those two things was the discreditation of epicycles. Just barely preceding, not preceding, it was actually syncretous with the time of the Western discovery of the square root of -1. So the discrediting of epicycles happened at about the same time as the emanation of the idea of the square root of -1, which is I, which didn't fully come into being as I until a little bit later. But the problem was coming about at the same time as epicycles were being discredited. Similarly, as in, I think, boiling it down to an oversimplified analogy, in Asia, in Asia, about the same time, quote unquote, Jesus, real or not, real and not, came to be, creating a trinity, but a one God. A one God. Was at about the same time in Asia, quote unquote, Zen Buddhism destroyed the concept of one God. Interesting. But Galilean, Copernican discrediting of epicycles as they relate to a, what do they call Earth-centric versus heliocentric? What do they call her? Earth-centric? It's just like yesterday when I couldn't remember the word Titans. Anyway, is the Earth as the center. Where's the center of the human body? Where east meets west. East, the circles, in one sense, and the west, the lines, the compass and the ruler. Now in Masonry, it's the compass and the square. I never got into Masonry. I had a Mason who was much more than a Mason. Asked me if I wanted to be one once. They always say, and I got nothing against Mason. But what I am saying is that I've always preferred the straight edge to the square, because the square is derived from the circle and the straight edge. And I always felt, well, it's cheating to use the square. It's not if you understand how the circle works and how the straight edge works, alone and together, which I don't, but which I'm seeking. So I got nothing against, I got nothing against Masons, and I don't know what all their different degrees mean and all that kind of thing, They mean a lot of different things at the same time. But what they really mean is the same thing as what Raphael's painting means. You could go on forever picking apart the little details, which are important. And if your mind's eye focuses on one, definitely focus on that. And like whatever you're thinking when you look at it, go with it. Whatever it is, just go with it. But if it makes you feel really, really bad, be warned. Flip it good. They want the best for us. God wants the best for us. Just like at the end of the day, you want what's best for you. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It's a good thing that you want what's best for you. That happy, playful, fun, gentle tenderness. To be a child at heart. Dreams can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. What a beautiful message. I lost several paths there, but I will trudge forward. Maybe I'll annotate later. I have a tendency to do that. Sometimes doing is this, sometimes doing is more structural things with exact building, which I don't do much of. Sometimes doing is writing. It's all things we do with our hands, as a man, as men, as mind. So yeah, I've said it before, but the square root, the negative square root of I is not, okay. So we have I, which is this yellow circle, as an epicycle, because that's how it breaks down. If you kind of marry the complex plane with the real plane, if you marry an X, quote unquote, okay, if you marry an XY and an XI plane, the two X's aren't necessarily the same. Okay. But this yellow circle is the epicycle for I. This orange circle is the epicycle for the square root of I. This green circle is the epicycle for the negative square root of I. Because if you square this, you get to I, because you come around here. The thing is, the positive and negative square root of I both come from the same place. So, in order for negative I, which normally we don't think about the epicycles, but they obscured them. Why did they obscure them? Well, the mean ones, the bad ones, was because they didn't want us to know. But behind all the bad ones was the good ones, who wanted us to discover it now, just as I'm discovering it now. Not to mention, we're talking about a plane. Now, if we're talking about spiral epicycles, where it's spirals built on spirals built on spirals, which are essentially three-dimensional epicycles, or four-dimensional epicycles, which is a higher order of understanding. Still leaves out the fifth and sixth dimension, but it's a better way of understanding. All these spirals built onto spirals built onto spirals now. That could be the fourth dimension, could also be 3 dimensions plus 3 dimensions of motion, time, IJK, built into that. But anyway, this epicycle represents the negative square root of I. But it started here. So by the time it gets here, it's already gone 3/4 of the way around. When it gets here, it's gone 5/4 of the way around. This is the only square root of I. And this is the size of the epicycle that represents that. In math and physics, when we multiply things by 1, we need to know where that 1 came from. Everything to the 0th power equals 1. How about 0? How about 1 to the 0? If we're talking about the complex plane, like 1 to the 1 goes like this. This is 1 to the 0. 1 to the 1 goes around that red line. Back to 0. Or 1. 1 to the 0 can't be divided. 1 to the 1 can be divided rationally along this circle. 1 to the 2 is twice around the circle and can be divided infinitely twice as many times. So it's like the Hilbert Hotel without having to shift anything. The shifting involved in the mathematics of the Hilbert Hotel or hostel is it's wrong. It's a mathematical maneuver related back to the right way, so it's not completely wrong. Same with string theory, but but they are wrong. And I had to look it up online. Because when I broke this down, and I came up with this, because you have the circle, and if we're talking about I times I to the 0th power is 0, or 1. I to the first power is I to the second power, -1, I to the third power, -I to the fourth power, 1. So every time, people always talk about EVI pi and all the cosine sine shit, but all you got to do is multiply by powers of I, and you go around that circle the same way e to the I pi equals -1, or e to the I pi equals 1, or vice versa, or plus or minus 1 equals 0, however it goes. All that shit. But if you just multiply by I, but if you get rid of I altogether and just say complex roots of 1 or roots of complex 1, you're always just going around this circle. But it depends on how you define I. Never mind omega, which I talked about more before with the Trinity. And it's like trying to marry this Trinity and this triumvirate. Trying to marry this cross or this polarity with a triangle. I've talked about that before, which relates to that shape, which is a major, the manila folder one. I've talked about it before. I'll talk about it more, and I got a lot more to learn. But whenever you're talking about 45-degree angles, you're also, because you have this shape here, but a lot of times when we're talking about 45 angles, we're thinking of the square, the 1 by 1, giving us root 2. So anytime you're talking about the square root of I, which is root 2 over 2, or root 2 over 2, 1 by 1, 1 by 1, 1 by 1 gives us root 2 and the half, half, or half by half, half by half, half by half, in the circle with 1, root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, 1 by 1, root 2. I think I'm screwing something up here. That don't look like root 2 over 2. Got a 1 by 1 with a 1. 1 by 1 with a 1. Gotta figure this out. I have to do this every friggin' time. I've been doing this for like fucking 20 years. Same stupid thing. Alright. So that's 1. But 1 by 1 it's root 2. 1 by 1. 1 by 1 it's root 2. So that's 1. That's 1. That's root 2. And then half of root 2. Half of root 2. That meets down there. So what's this then? What's this then? That's not a half. Oh no, it is root 2 over 2. Because root 2 comes down here. And root 2 over 2. Okay, yeah, that is. Because root 2 comes down over here. I always got to figure that shit out. Ugh. Yeah, because this is 1, and this is 1. So a 1 by 1 square gives you a root 2 hypotenuse. And
a 1 hypotenuse gives us a root 2 by root 2, kind of. Root 2 over 2 by root 2 over 2 square. And I was thinking, well, if this is root 2, this can't be root 2 over 2. But this isn't root 2 over 2. This is 1. This is root 2 over 2. This is root 2. I'm mathlexic. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you always have to use your reason to figure shit out. That's how bad I am at math, by the way. So, if you've never done this type of drawing, real mathematicians could tell you, like, this dude can't do this simple as shit. But that's the point. That's what the masters, that's what Michelangelo wants you to draw stick figures. I'm telling you. I am telling you. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Michelangelo is among us. And he wants us to draw stick figures. He wants us to make mud pies. He wants us to do silly jumping jacks. He wants us to trip trying to play hopscotch. He wants us to laugh at ourselves. That's what Michelangelo wants for us. The truth. Now, when we think of Michelangelo, the tortoise in the shell from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, what did he like? Pizza was his favorite thing. Well, no. I just said before what Raphael's painting of the philosophers represented. Greco-Roman, crushed into one, as Diogenes represented Italy and Greece at the same time, Greco-Roman. Looking to the east, to Splinter, the rat, ration. Michelangelo from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, his favorite food was pizza. Now, pizza is around here. It's actually mostly Greek pizza. There's a lot of pizza places around here, and I can't think of one that's Italian. They're all Greek. The most obvious one is Athens pizza, Greek pizza. But of course, like in New York City and so on, there's Italian pizza. Thin crust, thick crust, blah, 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 whatever, however you do it. Now, the interesting about pizza, it's a pizza pie. Relates to pie, not an accident. And a piece of pizza looks like a V, a peace sign. And a peace sign in a circle is a slice of pizza. But V, or what we know of as V, or what looks like a V, in Italian means 5. In Rome, whatever, Roman numerals, V means 5. My understanding is that in Greek, what looks like a V represents 6. So that also goes down into like codes, which they don't need, which we need to understand them. To get there, to see what crumbs they've left behind that we may get. The crumbs the crows didn't eat because they were onions, because they hurt, because they smell bad, because the crows don't eat onions, they only eat the crumb. Who's Harry Crumb? Who's Harriet Tubman? So yeah, like as far as codes go, you could imagine a code where you had like around here there's an Athens pizza, and down the road from that they sell Tony's pizzas. So I could buy a Tony's pizza and an Athens pizza, and I could have put a slice of each on the box and take a picture. And the code for that, depending on the way I put it, would be 56 or 65. There's a lot more to say about that, but if you just saw 2 pieces of pizza, you might think piece, piece. If you knew Latin, you might think 5, 5. But if it's on the Athens box, and what you know about it, so two of the same thing can mean different things depending on the context. It's not like that one I didn't figure out on my own as far as the context. But I did figure out the pizza slices. You got two pizza slices, but it matters where they came from, what they mean. So yeah, the yin yang, which I don't necessarily, I don't in my heart of hearts associate the yin yang with the complex plane, but I found it there as it relates to the square root of I. And yeah, when that comes down into meats, this image kind of breaks this bigger circle down into 9 parts from this circle. And if you didn't know, like if you just knew how to draw the circles and the lines, you might think, yeah, this divides this circle into 9 parts, but it actually doesn't when you do the math. It's pretty darn close, and it's close enough in a lot of ways for practical use, but the gaps aren't right between here and here. They're different sizes so far as I can tell. Could be wrong, but maybe I'll come on to that some other time. And I guess that relates to the rodent circle, which I'm very interested in the whole 369 deal. But the 369 deal can also be understood differently from the rodent, and the whole like Tesla 369 deal can be understood differently, or like the casting away of nines. It can be understood differently if we're just talking about the Trinity. So yeah, when we're talking about 45-degree angles, and one of the things that's interesting about this picture, which kind of represents a peace sign upside down, like a person with raised hands, a little bit, is this angle is a 45-degree angle. Zorro! This angle is a 45-degree angle, but because it's not encapsulated in a square where we're normally accustomed to seeing 45-degree angles, it doesn't look like a 45-degree angle. Like, that looks acute to me. But it's because it's not encapsulated in a square, which is, thinking in squares in some sense is a lesser way of thinking. It's useful, and it's been good for the world because it's a simpler way of thinking to get more people involved in the idea of geometry. But we also have to remember that when we're thinking of something that's square, like when we think of something that's square, and certainly when we're building, we build our posts square to the ground, to the foundation. We pour a flat foundation. But if we're thinking more exactly, it's always like a pole in a sphere. Every flat surface is part of the sphere of the earth, and it's a pole aimed at the center of the earth. So we always think of polarity as like gravity pulling down toward a flat plane, but it's really like the surface of a very big sphere with a pole that points to the center of the earth. But anyway, yeah, this just doesn't look like a 45-degree angle. To me, it looks more acute. If I said this angle is 45 degrees, my first thought is, no, it's not. I have to keep reaffirming it to myself. But if you encapsulate it in a square, all of a sudden, there it is, the 45-degree angle. And that all has to do with the idea of ration, the divine light of reason, is to be able to see that. Because the masters would look at that at an instant and know it was 45 degrees. Me, I had to work it out. But that's just as much 45 degrees as the one in the square. Does 45 degrees exist? Yes. But does it exist in a square as we know it as root 2 in a 1x1 square? No. Am I saying this is the way it exists? No. But it stretches my imagination. Where east meets west. Where Ptolemy and Plotinus, see, I don't know philosophy, and I don't know math, and I certainly don't know the East, but I know a few more Western names than Eastern ones, and I associate characters with them, and I'm mostly wrong. But if I get the story right, that's what they want us to know, is the story. It's just like Plotinus. I talk about Plotinus sometimes. I don't know shit about Plotinus, but I know he came about at about the same time that Greek philosophy died, at about the same time that Christian, aka Essenian, knowledge came to the fore. So, but they don't want you to dig through every little bit of history. They, the maestros, the masters, the ascended ones, the whatever, the Christs, the resurrected, not just the reincarnated, the reconstituted, the restored. They're not as interested that you dig back through all the stories. They just want to get you to the moral of the story, to Aesop. That's where they want to get you. Love. That's where they want to get me. I ain't there, but I see that's where they're trying to get me. And I'm doing my best to kind of follow their lead, because they are the true leaders. And they don't look like the leaders that we think of through history, except for maybe Gandhi, except for maybe Nelson Mandela, who we saw get their ass kicked, and they rised above anyway and did some kick-ass shit for their people. That's a good place to stop.